Welcome, everyone. My name is Rachel Sandberg, and I lead UC Berkeley Library services related to scholarly publishing. Thank you for coming to this virtual event, which we hope will provide uplifting insights into positive changes taking place in scholarly publishing. Specifically, changes that ensure that critical scientific information reaches the public and policymakers who need it. A few housekeeping matters first. This meeting will be recorded and made available on YouTube with captions. We're also providing live captioning during this session, and we encourage you to ask lots of questions. You can do that by putting them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. I want to start off by framing this discussion in light of what we've collectively experienced in 2020. The past year has been incredibly difficult on a global scale. Among other crises, we have witnessed the effects of systemic racism and brutality against people of color. Global warming has contributed to around 8,000 fires in California this year, burning more than 3 million acres of land here. And a novel virus has rapidly infected more than 39 million people, leading to over 1 million deaths worldwide and a devastating economic fallout. When public leaders and policymakers address the problems facing our communities and society, they rely on the kind of research and scholarship generated at the University of California, and UC Berkeley in particular. By now, you've likely heard that 2 UC Berkeley faculty won Nobels this year for their research. And in 2020, UC Berkeley authors like Solomon Siang published critical research on climate change, predicting that by the end of the century, mortality through climate change could reach tens of millions of deaths yearly worldwide, matching the rate for all infectious diseases combined. Berkeley scholars like Mark Hellerstein have proposed alternate models for assessing COVID-19 vaccine protection based on T-cell lifespan. UC Berkeley PhD candidate Jade Benjamin Chung's probability analysis suggests likely a much higher rate of COVID-19 infection than existing testing has revealed. The public value of this kind of research and scholarship created at UC Berkeley is extraordinary. And what's more, there's a lot of it. Across the 10 UC campuses, University of California authors collectively publish nearly 10% of all scholarly literature in the United States, more than any other university system. This also represents around 2% of all scholarly literature published yearly throughout the entire world. Our scholars are prolific, and their work is both important and valued by the academy and tax-paying public. The true impact of UC research has been limited, however, by the incredible constraints on who has access to read it. If you've ever tried to access a scientific paper online, you may have confronted the problem of being asked to pay around $40. And that's because 85% of scholarly journal articles published each year are still stuck behind these paywalls, slowing scientific discovery because only people who have subscriptions can access and read them. Subscription prices of commercial scholarly journals continue to increase, while university library collections budgets continue to shrink, further constricting access to knowledge, since not all institutions are lucky enough to have the millions of dollars needed each year to spend on securing campus access to this high-priced journal content. If an institution's scholars don't have access to research, then their ability to use it to help them come up with new ideas and insights is severely limited, and scientific progress is hampered. And this says nothing of the harm to public and underserved communities who can't possibly invest in procuring reading access to such high-priced content. If a doctor in the field cannot afford access to new research protocols for the diseases she treats, how might the health of her patients suffer? And at the same time, it is the public she treats who has paid for much of this research to begin with, through our tax dollars that fund it. The University of California has long believed that our research should be free for all to access. A world without barriers to knowledge promotes progress and maximizes the impact of research. This urgency has only grown during the current public health crisis surrounding COVID-19. In the time of this pandemic, academic publishers have recognized free and open access as the optimal mechanism for achieving rapid progress towards solutions on many fronts, including vaccines, therapeutics, disease epidemiology, and others. If publishers can make research on COVID-19 available for free to read, why stop there? How can we extend this open access publishing paradigm to all of scholarly publishing? Today, we'll use the COVID-19 pandemic as a frame to explore how scholarly publishing is shifting to open access, and what the UC is doing to ensure that everyone here and around the world can read our cutting-edge scholarship to drive innovation and change. We will be in conversation with 3 UC Berkeley faculty members who are helping to push the shift to open access publishing. Jeff MacKie-Mason, University Librarian and Economics Professor, Britt Glaunsinger, Professor and Researcher who specializes in viruses, and Randy Schekman, Nobel Laureate and Professor. They will each answer questions to explain why we should never go back to our old ways of scientific publishing. Jeff, I will get started with you. In your view as an economist, why isn't all scholarly publishing open access? Can you explain the basics of the academic publishing landscape and why, after decades of academic community efforts to achieve open access, paywalls still predominate as a funding model?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for being here this morning. There are costs of publishing, managing the process for the over 3 million articles that are submitted for review every year, and then typesetting, hosting, and preserving the over 2 million that are published on digital servers forever. People are providing work to publish scholarship, and they do need to be paid. In the days of print publishing, a big part of the cost was the paper and ink for each incremental copy printed, and the shipping costs for the heavy paper documents. I used to have many bookshelves filled with the print journals in my field. Because each reader who wanted a copy was creating some cost, publishers found it convenient to sell copies to readers, usually as a subscription. But today, all scholarly articles are published electronically. And with electronic publishing, there is no incremental cost for each additional reader. Once the publisher publishes the first copy on a server, there's no added cost for 1, 100, or 1 million readers to access and read it. So with electronic publishing, we could pay the publisher to cover the costs of creating that first electronic copy, but then let everyone read it without charging them for reading. That's open access. Pay the publishing cost, but then everyone reads for free. So why have most publishers resisted open access publishing? The issue's simple: profit. Or for nonprofit publishers, what we call surplus. Every article is unique. It reports new discoveries, new ideas, and authors give publishers their copyright in exchange for publishing their article. That means that publishers become legal monopolists, controlling the reading access to those unique articles. They can make monopoly profits by charging every reader rather than just charging once for the cost to publish the article. And so they defend their subscription model. How much profit are the publishers protecting? The top scholarly publishers earn operating profit margins of 35% to 43%. These are among the highest operating profit margins in the world. The average for all US publicly traded firms is only 11%. Apple Computer's operating margin is 25%, Google's is 21%, but for scholarly publishing, it's 35 to 43%. So that's why publishers defend the paywall and resist open access. They want to take taxpayer and tuition funding away from the universities and turn it into, frankly, obscene shareholder profits.
What has the University of California, and in particular UC Berkeley, been doing to help change all of this? Can you touch on the impact and challenges of the University of California's efforts, including some of the successes and our continued hurdles?
Sure. In 2016, UC Berkeley led the full University of California system in launching a strategic program to rapidly transform the worldwide publishing industry from subscription paywalls to open access publishing. And we're not alone. We have many European partners, but the UC has been far out in front among US institutions, and 2/3 of top scholarly articles come from the US. This is a system-wide effort. but Berkeley led the drafting of the strategic plan, and I'm the co-chair of the system-wide publisher negotiating team, so I can give you a report from the front lines. One of our most powerful and novel strategies to change the scholarly publishing world is to negotiate what we call transformative agreements with major publishers. These agreements transform our subscription contracts into open access publishing agreements. In simple terms, rather than paying to read the articles published in a journal, we want to pay a publishing service fee for each UC article published. And then the world gets to read UC research for free, and we get to read all of the other articles for free. Publishers are resisting, but we're big and we're tough negotiators, and we're having much success and an enormous impact on the world. For example, in the past year, we've signed 5 of the first transformative publishing agreements in the US, and one of those is the biggest ever. And at the end of 2018, we shook up the world by canceling our $11 million a year. That's $11 million a year subscription with the largest publisher, Elsevier, refusing to pay them a penny until they signed an open access publishing agreement with us. Finally, Elsevier has brought an encouraging offer back to us this summer. And after almost 2 years, we're back in active negotiations with them. The whole academic world has been watching this high stakes negotiation with bated breath, and our willingness to cancel has led several other large universities and consortia to also cancel their subscriptions. And that's led Elsevier to start offering open access publishing agreements to other major customers as well.
Great, thank you. Britt, drawing on the virus research you perform, can you explain how open access publishing benefits the public? And also how having open access to scientific papers benefits researchers?
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl, for having me on here and for hosting this. So COVID-19 has taught us something really key about the traditional publication model, which is that in a crisis, it just doesn't work. To combat a pandemic, this one or any pandemic, we need really rapid dissemination of new findings. And it is critical that this information be accessible by everyone, scientists, medical personnel, policymakers, you name it. And that's because each new discovery essentially serves as a building block for the next discovery. So traditionally, in my field, for example, which is biomedical sciences, formal peer review and publication can take anywhere from 6 to 12 or more months. And those published data are then often subsequently held behind a paywall for an additional 6 to 12 months before they can be accessed without a fee, if ever, in some fields. So consider the fact that we are barely 1 year into the COVID pandemic. How far do you think we would be towards fighting it if the first papers were just now emerging and if they were all locked behind a paywall? To effectively deal with a public health emergency, we need a level playing field in which access to the latest discoveries and technologies are unconditionally available to all communities and countries, developed countries and developing countries. And limiting access, basically, the problem is that it slows the pace of discovery since fewer minds can contribute, and that dilutes the diversity of thought and ideas that go into solving the problem. Importantly, underserved communities are also, of course, disproportionately impacted and being killed by COVID and many other diseases. And individuals within these communities and working for these communities deserve the full spectrum of available knowledge to lessen that disease burden. So now the publication model, as Jeff was saying, has been completely upended to one of open access during this pandemic. And it's pretty obvious how the pace and dissemination of scientific findings has been hugely accelerated. But even now, this open access is only being applied to COVID research. And that's not the only global killer on the loose. There's TB, AIDS, influenza, malaria, heart disease, cancer. Most of the latest research on all those killers remains locked behind the paywall. And so I and many others can't help but wonder how the landscape of knowledge on those diseases might be different if all of the newest findings of them were freely available, basically to all the brilliant minds everywhere, those with the funding to see them and those without the funding to see them. And even for COVID, we need to ensure that the open nature of all of this work is retained. So although most journals wonderfully are now allowing free access to COVID-related information, for many of these papers, this access doesn't actually come with a categorized license that's needed to allow reuse rights beyond reading, things like sharing and redistributing the findings. And the publisher can basically revoke this access at any time. So indeed, some of the more prominent publishers indicate directly on their websites that the information is only available temporarily, essentially during the duration of this crisis. And that, I think, is a really important limitation, because the utility of all of the COVID research doesn't end when this pandemic ends. It is basically going to serve as the new baseline for fighting the next one.
Great. And do you have anything else to add about how open access to COVID-19 scholarship in particular has made an impact in our ability to understand or treat this disease?
Yeah, I think that by essentially crowdsourcing the data almost, which is what's being done for this pandemic, the observations can either be immediately used for public good. And some clear examples of this were the fact that the sequences of the COVID-2 virus, as soon as they were generated, they were immediately made public. And within hours and days of their release, those open access sequences were used to initiate the design of diagnostic tests, many of which have been developed and are being used on the UC Berkeley campus, as well as RNA-based vaccines. These sequences, as they continue to come out on an open access platforms, have revealed that early on, the virus was undergoing sustained human-to-human transmission, which was really important for designing public health measures to fight it. And importantly, so those are the good things that come out of the research, but the open access nature of this current pandemic is important because that rapid dissemination means that observations can also be discarded as invalid more rapidly because they can be scrutinized by the broader scientific community. And a good example of this is the false claims that were made about the origin of COVID-2 being lab-based, basically. And so the bottom line is that open access means more eyes on the discoveries, such that those with valuable conclusions can be leveraged, and those with invalid conclusions are more rapidly flagged as suspect. And then things like emerging information about drug screens and potential treatments are now available not only to the general public and scientists, but of course to things like companies who can consider picking them up for development, and to physicians and public health workers to help them make decisions as things are evolving in real time. So thanks to this global collaboration and coordination and the immediate dissemination of the results, there is a good chance that we will have a coronavirus vaccine within a timeline that shatters all previous records. Before COVID-2, the fastest vaccines on record were measles and then Ebola, and these were developed in 4 to 5 years, but many vaccines have taken decades to develop. And so this is really a remarkable pace, and I think largely due to the coordination that open access plays a key role in. The other thing that I want to mention is that it's not all about the sort of hard science, the molecular biology and biochemistry of how the virus works and drugs to stop it. But a lot of the research that's going on is in the social science field as well. And so this affects our understanding of politics and the economy and education practices. And open access can also help increase public engagement with scientists. And that's important because there is a whole lot of misinformation out there right now. And without the correct information being able to be accessed by everyone, it's hard to allay public fears that may be based on that misinformation or lack of information because it's held behind a paywall. And I've given a number of talks and webinars to public audiences and the lay public on the coronavirus and how it gets into our cells and takes over our cells. And I'm only able to share that newest information with anybody who wants to listen because it's available to me through open access publishing or on preprint servers. And it's also, of course, available to journalists as well, who themselves play really important roles in making people aware of that content. So how can journalists know if they themselves, as members of the general public, can't get to that information?
Thank you so much. Randy, drawing on your tenure as editor-in-chief of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and later as editor of eLife, can you reflect on the trajectory of open access to scientific research over the past 20 years and the unsustainability of the subscription system?
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Thanks for moderating this session, and thanks to Jeff and Britt for building up a story that I hope will be persuasive to the members of our audience. I'd like to build on their comments to highlight very specific journals that I've had some experience with and how they've handled the transition to open access, some successfully, others not. I had the opportunity some years ago with a substantial investment from the Wellcome Trust, the largest funder of biomedical science in Britain, the Max Planck Society, a very large, powerful organization in Germany, and the American Howard Hughes Medical Institute to initiate a new online open access journal called eLife. And we have adopted from the start I think a very forceful posture in favor of open access. And we have proved in this journal that the mechanism of support can be sustained. We were before then led by an even more important effort some years earlier called the Public Library of Science, or PLOS. And these two journals, I think, have proved that open access is a viable option and a sustainable one. And I'd like to draw a contrast between those journals and some other journals that have been less successful. We, PLOS and eLife, are on the path to being commercially viable. We don't make a profit, but we don't operate at a loss. In contrast, commercial journals that you've already heard about from Jeff, such as Elsevier and Springer Nature, although they have adopted some open access policies for many of their titles, they, as you heard from Jeff, have been quite resistant to adopt this for their most successful journals, such as Nature and the Nature category-specific journals, and Cell and Lancet, the journals that are published by Elsevier. The PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, is a very important scientific journal that is used worldwide to publish very important research. It is sponsored by the US National Academy of Sciences, and they do allow some open access publication. They have, for an additional fee, open access, first started by my Berkeley predecessor and the editorial board, Nicholas Cosarelli. They have also an option for the most liberal copyright license, which is called CC-BY, but these are at an additional cost to the author. They have not yet gone to fully open access for fear of losing subscription license fees from institutions such as the University of California. Even though, as Jeff and his colleagues in the library realized, the subscription fee, the license fee that we pay the National Academy of Science for that journal is much lower, $25,000 a year, than what Jeff told you about, the $11 million a year that's paid by UC for access to Elsevier journals. So the National Academy of Sciences, very much like eLife and PLOS, but certainly unlike the commercial journals, requires that the PNAS, its journal, break even and neither generate a profit for the academy or for the journal. So they have some ways to go, but I'm quite confident that they will eventually adopt the open access model and find a way to make it happen, since they don't rely on a profit. So this is going to be, of course, a big contrast to the commercial journals, which you heard from Jeff are so powerful and so profitable. Now, I'd like to also add another journal, a very important one, comparable in impact to the journal Nature. It's called Science Magazine. It's published by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It is really one of the most influential journals covering all of sciences, but it operates by a very different model, more like the commercial journals, in generating a lot of profit, not for shareholders or for owners, but rather for the activities, the beneficial activities of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. Nonetheless, their model has been to generate quite a substantial profit, even though it's a not-for-profit association. They do offer one new title called Science Advances, which is completely open access, but the main flagship journal, the one that I remember reading when I was in high school, that was available even to high schools at virtually no cost, but is no longer available because of the excessive cost, that journal, Science Magazine, continues to operate at a profit, and they have been very resistant to the open access model. There are other examples of this. Most scientific societies publish their own journals. They operate at a small profit, nonetheless a profit that is turned back to the benefit of the societies as they're seeking to represent their own scientists in career development and in lobbying in Washington. Some of the scientific societies, on the other hand, I have to say are greedy. One prominent example is the American Chemical Society, which generates literally hundreds of millions of dollars in profit for their journals. And they have been terribly resistant to the open access movement. They continue to be resistant even in the face of an apparent adoption of this model by Springer Nature, and as we heard from Jeff, possibly Elsevier. So we have a long way to go. So progress has been slow, but recent events have greatly accelerated the march toward open access. In addition to Jeff's leadership efforts for our library and the UC digital libraries, even larger forces are at play. Some of you may have heard that the OSTP, the arm for technology representation by the current administration, has proposed a mandate that all papers that are published on the basis of work that was supported by the federal government should be made available open access immediately. This was a remarkable proposal from the science advisor to the current administration. Their minds are elsewhere now, and we don't know if they'll make any progress on this, but many of us in the academic community, particularly in the open access community, intend to keep the pressure on for them to do this. Of course, the commercial publishers and the most profitable publishers, such as the American Chemical Society, have been fighting this policy as it threatens, as you heard from Jeff, their profit margin. Now, I will say, Europe is a bit ahead of us in this respect. There is an effort in Europe called Coalition S that has organized an effort not only in Europe, but internationally, to put pressure on all publishers to adopt or to pledge to move in the direction of full open access. This effort appears to be succeeding, as Springer Nature has adopted the so-called Plan S, and a number of major private funding organizations, such as the Wellcome Trust, the Gates Foundation, and now directly affecting Britt and me, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, have all signed on to pledge to this Plan S for their investigators. With such a movement, the resistance on the part of the commercial and the most profitable scientific society journals will surely melt away.
Good. What has COVID-19 taught us about how scholarly publishing should be funded going forward? And what should the University of California keep doing? What should it do differently to bring about an open access publishing revolution?
Well, again, as you've heard from Jeff, and I'm really a great supporter of UC's efforts, the UC Digital Library, and particularly with Jeff's leadership in the negotiating team. We in the University of California have been really the leader in promoting open access for the scholarship of our faculty and students. And as you heard from Jeff, there are other institutions that have followed suit. Most recently, MIT has canceled their contract with Elsevier for the very same reasons that we did so 2 years ago. And as a result, we've been able to push the major publishers who've been quite resistant to this movement. And as I've said, I'm proud of the way that we're fighting back against frankly, the greed of the largest commercial publisher of scientific literature, Elsevier. We can and we will move this forward, and I see complete change taking shape in just a few years. Now, just to reiterate what you've already heard, the advantages of open access, and especially the distribution of scientific manuscripts on preprint servers, you heard this from Britt, has been on display during the pandemic. Now, in the traditional model of publication, a journal editor will receive a manuscript and solicit, if the paper is appropriate for the journal, the editor will solicit the opinions of 2, 3, or possibly more experts, outside experts, not connected to the work, who are asked to judge the quality and importance of the work. These people then read the paper and independently render their opinions. And then these opinions are judged by the editor, and he or she decides if the work is in principle appropriate for publication. But in recent years, in addition to the open access movement, a very powerful new method of display of the scientific literature, which Britt alluded to, has been developed, at least in the biological sciences, with the advent of what are so-called preprint servers, where as an investigator, when you're ready to publish your work, you take the manuscript and you simply post it online at a central repository. This has existed in physics for over 30 years, the physics archive, but now we have what's called the bioarchive and the medRxiv. And this work is then available prior to peer review for anyone in the world to access and to read. And this has had, as Britt mentioned, an enormous impact just in the pandemic period, where papers are able to be read and evaluated by hundreds, possibly thousands of people. So instead of the traditional model where you have 2 or 3 experts reviewing and trying to identify potential flaws, in this case, with a preprint server, you have thousands of eyes on the pages of a manuscript, and you have many more opportunities for input and comment. And so as a result, I think a lot of papers that shouldn't have been published in the past, and I give you the example of the really unfortunate publication by the journal Lancet of the work by Wakefield and colleagues that led us to believe that some people to believe that vaccination may give rise to autism. If that paper, which had subsequently was retracted, if that paper had been on a preprint server for all to see, I'm sure the flaws in that work would have been revealed much earlier. So that's a new development in addition to open access. And just in the pandemic period, we've seen examples of flawed statistical analysis of COVID treatment regimens that have been called into question and caused papers to be taken down. So we on the campus have our own portal, and investigators, professors on campus are asked to post their papers, but these larger preprint servers, such as in physics, in life sciences, and in medicine, I think now are leading the way for a greater influence on the development of open access.
Thank you all very much. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in Q&A. We've gotten a few so far. I'm going to throw the first question out to any of the panelists. What else do you, in light of having heard each other talk now, what else do you want UC alumni and the tax-paying public to know about the way research is funded and published? Are there any actions that they themselves can take to support broader access to published research?
Well, let me try one point to make, and that is many of you in the audience have had occasion, I'm certain, reading newspapers where you learn about some development in medicine or physics or astronomy, and you may wish to dig more deeply into the subject. And I find even in the most outstanding newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, where they really have science reporters, I find the articles often not really satisfying in getting to the basis of something. It talks about the practical value of something, but not really deeply into the scholarship. Now, with open access, a journalist can simply put the link to a paper right in the newspaper article. And if you're reading online, you can click on that link and go directly to the article and then have the advantage of reading the details from the scholar. So this is a really tremendous advantage for those of you who want to learn more than the few hundred words that you find in a typical newspaper article. So if you like that and you find advantage in doing that, then I would urge you to take up your enthusiasm with the federal government and this new proposal from the OSTP to mandate open access publication for all federally funded research.
I'll just add that that's something that people might not know about payment for the publication of these articles isn't just at the level of whether or not the university libraries are paying for open access, but we, the researchers and the heads of labs, already first pay the journals to have these discoveries published. So say I get grants from the National Institutes of Health, which are of course taxpayer money, to help fund the research that we do on viruses. Then that research is done, it undergoes peer review and is ultimately accepted for publication. Well, in order to have that published, I have to then take a portion of my NIH grants, which are earmarked to do the research, to pay anywhere from usually $2,000 to more than $7,000 per publication to have it put out there in the first place. And that is on top of the then subsequent fees that are levied at the institutional level and at the individual level for anyone who wants to read it. So there's a lot of money that goes into just getting those discoveries out there. And a lot of that money comes from taxpayers who probably don't realize that that's where some of the money is going. It should be going to the research, not to then have them be able to, have to pay so much more, either, sort of through the back door of where their taxpayer money is going, or on the front end, if by them just paying the fee in order to be able to see the paper in the first place.
And Jeff, do you have anything else to add, or I can move on? Okay. So Jeff, you mentioned Elsevier negotiations. Curious to hear how you think that will turn out.
Thanks, Rachel. We are back in negotiation with Elsevier, as I mentioned. They came forward with an offer that responded to what we were asking for, that heard the things that the UC said 2 years ago it wanted. They came back with that offer this summer. It's still was not immediately acceptable, but we agreed to reopen negotiations. We're in active negotiations with them at the moment. In fact, we've got a negotiating session on Monday morning that we've been preparing for actively this week. We're hoping that we might be able to reach an agreement with them by the end of this calendar year. We've scheduled meetings with them basically in the cross-Atlantic meetings, so a little bit of time zone issue between Europe and California. But we've managed to schedule meetings for about every 3 weeks between now and the end of the year, with some cautious optimism that we may be able to reach an agreement this year. But they've been very recalcitrant in the past, obviously, and we don't want to count anything until we actually get there, but we're definitely making more progress this year.
A quick follow-up question that came to us related to that is, without subscriptions, what methods has the campus been using to provide students and faculty with access to Elsevier papers, especially in fields without a strong preprint tradition?
Thanks, that's a great question. And the answer to it actually is very good. The There's several different methods to get legal access to scholarly research without getting it directly from the publisher. The one that turns out to be most widely used and most successful and fastest is effectively the preprint servers that Britt and Randy talked about, or variations on those. Now, for it to be legal, it has to be the pre-copyright version. It can't be the version that has been transferred to the publisher and copyrighted. So it has to be a version just before the copyright is transferred to the publisher. But generally, there is such a version that has been peer reviewed, and so it's been checked for accuracy and reliability. More and more of those are being made available on preprint servers, or it's actually fairly easy to find authors these days through the internet. And so scholars are often just contacting authors directly to get a copy of their paper. And we authors like to be read. So anytime somebody pays us the compliment of asking us for a copy, it's very quick to respond and attach a copy to our email and send it to them. So that's working very well. If that doesn't work, our scholars can always come to the library, and we have two main legal channels to get access to every single article. There's nothing we can't get access to. First, we can borrow some through interlibrary loan from other libraries. There's a limit on how much we can do that without paying copyright fees, but we're willing to pay those copyright fees if our scholars need the papers. But we can do it, and since these are electronic articles, we can satisfy interlibrary loan requests in less than 24 hours generally. So we aren't slowing people down very much. And finally, in the worst cases, we can buy the individual articles from the publishers if we have to without a subscription. It's very expensive. We don't want to do that often, but that's a means of last resort. We're not going to let our scholars down. Our faculty and our students need access to research, and during the time we don't have an agreement with Elsevier, we'll do what it takes to get it to them. And as I said, for the requests that come to the library, we're providing over 85% of them within 24 hours. And those are the slower ones. The faster requests are the ones that people deal with on their own directly through preprint servers and contacting authors through email.
Great. Britt and Randy, you are likely members of scholarly societies, and Randy, you also talked about various scholarly societies. I'm wondering, from your perspective on the inside, what should scholarly societies or their journal editorial boards do to move societies along the path towards open access?
Britt, go ahead.
Well, I think that, so the society that I am a member of and hear this discussed a lot about through is the American Society of Microbiology, which includes virologists and other microbiologists. And it's a real challenge for many societies like that who have historically relied on their subscription journals as a means of generating income, as Randy indicated, to often do other good work for the scientific community. But just because that has been useful for them, I don't think necessarily justifies the cost for the institutions and the individual peoples. And so I'm pretty sure that all societies are now engaging, certainly the ASM is, and the others that Randy mentioned, in a lot of deep discussion about they know change is coming. So I was part of discussions more than a year ago when Plan S, the open access plan from the European Union was implemented. They saw that, they know it's coming to the United States. They know they're going to have to make those changes and basically think about how they can change their revenue streams to meet what are sort of more modern times, that you can't rely on things that are old-fashioned because they've worked when times have moved on. And so I think for smaller societies, it really is a challenge, and I don't think we should overlook that. And they're doing things like generating open access journals within their suite of journals. But I think it's going to be important for them to think more broadly than just let's create an open access journal or two to comply with this and to really sort of, be forward thinking and forward moving in this arena.
The ASM actually has been really terrific in this respect. I know the executive director of the ASM. He more so than virtually any other scientific society has been pushing open access for your journals. He was formerly the executive director of the society, which I served as president some years ago, the American Society for Cell Biology. They have one small journal Our colleague Matthew Welch is now the editor-in-chief of that journal, and they are stuck in a problem. The journal generates a small profit for the good works that they do in the Cell Biology Society, and but they know that open access is the model that they are going to have to adopt. And I've encouraged them, frankly, as well as the National Academy of Sciences, to go to the host institutions that had paid license fees for open access to negotiate some contribution to the effort of these societies to move in that direction. I know the University of California, Jeff has assured me privately that the University of California would be pleased to negotiate with the National Academy of Sciences and likewise with other scientific societies to provide some margin of comfort for them, not enough to make the executives of the American Chemical Society wealthy, but enough to provide benefit to the scientific society. So I think the usual scientific societies that rely on a small profit margin are not the problem. I think they can adopt. It's those that rely on a very large profit margin that are going to have to make substantial changes.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit if I might. First, I can give Randy a quick update and the rest of you. We're actually now in negotiations with the National Academy of Sciences to work on, I can't promise that we'll succeed, but we are working right now with them on the proceedings and with other society publishers. One of the 5 agreements we signed of the transformative agreements in the past year is with the large professional society, academic professional society for computer science, the Association of Computing Machinery. So that's one of the transformative agreements that's setting the path, and they have followed on in signing similar agreements with a number of other institutions. And we did that collaboratively with MIT and Carnegie Mellon and Iowa State. So it was several institutions together, and now others have followed. I'll also say the University of California is leading in this area as well. Indeed, I'm going to put a plug in for our moderator here. Rachel is leading a nationwide organization called Transitioning Society Publications to Open Access that is a collaboration among a number of universities and also societies and publishers to find business models that succeed for societies to solve these problems that Britt and Randy mentioned. They are difficult challenges and there's a lot of work to be done, but we are making progress on it, and we're seeing journals change every year. More and more societies are finding ways to move to open access publishing, and the UC is leading in this as well. So we can be very proud of that.
Great. And the last question that's come in is, and as if the 3 of you don't have enough to do with your limited time, what stumbling blocks do you see ahead in the road to getting to a tipping point for open access? And how do you personally plan to help the UC or your societies or the world navigate those stumbling blocks?
Well, I can chime in. I think the taking on the big commercial publishers continues to be a problem. And in spite of the success that Jeff and his colleagues have had, I remain dubious about Elsevier. They have an enormous profit margin. I had the CEO of Elsevier in my office along with Jeff. She didn't want to talk about contract negotiations, but inevitably I drew the conversation in that direction and pointed out the tremendous range in the fees that they charge according to institutions. I think until more institutions like the University of California, MIT, the entire country of Germany, take them on and force them to the negotiating table, I think we're still going to see a problem. So I'm doing my bit. I've started a new effort with the support from the Sergey Brin Family Foundation, a new effort to identify investigators around the world who are doing basic science on Parkinson's disease. And our policy for this very large group of scholars is they have to publish everything that they generate from these funds in gold standard open access journals. And I think if more funders, particularly the federal government, take this mission on, then it'll be easy.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists so very much for taking the time and for answering all of these questions, and to thank all of you listening in. We hope it was inspirational about the changes to come. Just a reminder that the talk was recorded and we will be making that link available on YouTube. So if you missed anything, you can catch up later. Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful weekend. And if you are interested in following up on any of the things that we talked about, we have these links here, which again will be part of the recording. So we encourage you to either check them out or to reach out to us. My office is scall-com@berkeley.edu, and we'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions you have. Thank you all so very much.